Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss productivity tactics that work for neurodiverse individuals.
Every episode, we interview guests with lived experience of neurodiversity who also have a solid productivity and habit game, and pass the learnings on to you, our wise and benevolent audience.
We're your hosts, Jeremy and Joey.
I'm Joey, and I coach creatives to get moving on their most ambitious projects through the power of solid habits and strong focus. I'm also a perpetual student of psychology and perpetually on a quest to a one-armed chin-up.
And I'm Jeremy. I'm a neurodiverse software developer turned startup founder building habit and focus software for people with ADHD. My cool party trick is leaving parties early so I get to sleep on time to do my 3-hour-long morning routine. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by FocusBear, a habit and productivity app that makes healthy habits and deep work the path of least resistance. If you have a tendency to check emails or scroll through Instagram first thing in the morning, but long to develop a meditation and exercise habit first thing, FocusBear can help you. The app blocks distractions on all your devices and guides you through your habits one at a time. Throughout the day, FocusBear assists you to stay in deep work by blocking websites and apps that are unrelated to your chosen focus mode. Life's not all about work though. You'll be prompted to take regular breaks to rest your eyes and stretch your muscles. At the end of the day, FocusBear helps you switch off. Work-related apps get hidden so you can unwind and sleep well. Check out the app by going to focusbear.io. Welcome to episode number 28 of the Focus and Chill podcast. We're thrilled to be joined by Alisdair Gurling today. Alisdair is a PhD candidate at Monash University's Emerging Technologies Research Lab, where he investigates personalised assistive technology to help neurodivergent students. Outside his research, Alisdair works as a learning designer for Nextia, designing assistive technology for people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and other conditions. A man of many talents, he also does freelance web design. Welcome to the show, Alisdair.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Really good. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. To kick things off, can you tell us about your personal journey with neurodiversity and becoming aware of your own neurodivergence?
Absolutely. I think lots of people might feel this way, but I feel very lucky that I became aware of my neurodiversity and I sort of did an in-depth discovery and unpacking of what it was for me to learn and be in the world, just as technology got fast enough to operate at the speed of people's minds. And so I can't really disentangle me realizing what it was to learn with me realizing what it was to learn with technology and with other people by connecting with them in words and also digitally and all this stuff. So for me, that's the big shift that I think lots of people maybe in my age group with neurodiversity know that maybe people in the generation above didn't know. And then the generation, I guess, above that, being neurodiverse, having ADHD or dyslexia or whatever it might be, just was not an available condition, right? And now it is. And then now sort of digitally mediated. But for me, I was very lucky. I had two academics and doctors in my family. And so they discovered very early on that me and my twin sister and my elder sister, we all had some form of learning difficulty. And so I had a very proactive family. And I was sort of constantly told that actually to learn was what was valuable and to exceed academically was only a byproduct of that learning. And so for me, unpacking why I was outside of the norm in one way or another, it was just a byproduct of me, trying to bumble along and make sense of what it was for me to just be in the world. And I think that sort of sense that, any disorder, as sort of some medical practitioner might describe it, really, that wasn't the frame I ever used. That wasn't something that we really spent time talking about. We spent time talking about what was happening and what I was struggling with. And then, yes, there were, trips to psychiatrists and educational psychologists and speech therapists and so on when I was growing up. But I think that was kept at bay. And what was kept, the sort of key focus was how we were and how we could be happy and how we could learn. So there you go. That's kind of how I came to neurodiversity.
I love that, and it's such an important perspective to see it as almost a fortunate occurrence, and also how you were describing previous generations that even probably 10 years ago, there was probably a lot more stigma about various aspects of neurodiversity, whereas now there's probably a lot more embracing of some of the positive aspects of it.
I think so. And I was the first kid in my school to have a laptop. I used to sit in the back and in the corner because that was where the only plug in the room was. And I used to have back problems because the laptop was like 15 kilos or something. And so, for me, I was getting to the point where I couldn't focus and I couldn't write. And my handwriting, even now, I often can't read my own handwriting. And so I would get, everyone would get A's, B's, D's. I would get U, unmarkable, right? And then I got my laptop one day and they were suddenly A's. And then even since then, I got to be able to speak my work. And as far as I'm aware, I was the first kid in the UK to be given the ability to use voice to text in their exams for GCSEs, which is the big exam there at 16. So I feel like I really was absolutely, not a moment too soon. It couldn't have happened even months before it happened to me. And so it does feel like I'm just absolutely at the edge creeping forward. And that kind of feels so lucky.
And now you're paying it forward with the research that you're doing and helping other people.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like that idea. It's the idea that I think about a lot, which is that if only there was someone like me that I could have spoken to when I was a little younger, that would have been really, really awesome. But also, the fact is that most people who have experience with neurodiversity have experience with knowing what it's like to be thinking faster than your own mind can communicate outwards. The idea of having nuance and detail locked away in a way that it can't escape. Lots of people never keep going in academia because lots of forces in academia try and sort of, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, it has to be communicated in these papers. It has to be communicated in text in this highly structured way, in a perfectly spelled way, in a well-referenced way, all this kind of stuff. And so it means how many people with dyslexia or ADHD or any kind of neurodiversity actually end up going through to PhDs? No one. It's a tiny little number. And so I feel like I've slipped through the cracks, and I feel a responsibility, not just to help people, but a responsibility to use this kind of little glimmer to keep going. So yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, and continue on that idea of paying it forward, Alisdair, could you tell us a bit more about the current things that you're working on?
Totally. So for me, there's kind of two strategies that are happening simultaneously. I've got lots of other little projects and things that happen. My life is not by, big pillars, but really by single projects. I quite like it that way. I quite like the novelty of those new things, but usually they daisy chain into one another. So one project ends and there's some thread of that I want to keep going. And so I'll build that into the next project. But the two elements are, one is I'm doing research, and that's to create theories and strategies and concepts that haven't been really written down or thought of before, or expand on the ideas that have already been written about, and to understand what it is to be a neurodiverse person and to extend your consciousness into digital environments and use technology to sort of overcome the barriers that exist in our own minds, but also the barriers that exist in society that we're forced to deal with. And then the other half of that is I spend time actually working with students and parents and running sessions at schools about digital literacy, and particularly about assistive technology is the term that everyone uses. But for me, it's just maybe embedded technology or embodied technology or something like that. I'm still working on language. My PhD title is Digital Prosthetics, Neurodiversity and the Connected Mind. So that's the single sentence, but then there's 40,000 words worth of explanation to make that make sense.
And that's actually the first time I've heard the term embodied technology. So could you tell us a bit more about what that is?
Sure. So for me, one of the easiest ways to think about neurodiversity and how to navigate the world, a neurotypical world in a neurodiverse way, which is a really exciting prospect. Potentially it means you can do unexpected and delightful things that might delight you and delight other people as well. But there's kind of three ways of approaching difficulties that you encounter. One is the way that anyone who experiences this stuff or knows anyone who has dyslexia or ADHD or autism or any kind of neurodiversity knows. And that's to brute force it. That's number one. And that is, it takes 45 minutes for someone to sit down and do this thing. It'll take me 4 hours and I'll just do it. And it's hard and it's not fair, but it is the strategy that people use because it works a lot of the time. And a lot of the stuff you guys talk about on the podcast and a lot of stuff I think we all in this space read about and think about are ways that we can kind of bring that down, that we can make it less painful. But that's brute forcing is the first option. The second option is to learn your way around it or to restructure the world around it. And that is If it's in dyslexia, it's like, oh, you can't read using traditional learning methods, so you'll learn phonics, or you'll make a room much more ordered and organized, or you'll use music that helps you focus, like Endel or some of the kind of binaural beats or something like that, right? So you'll use strategies that will change and shape the world in your favor. Or maybe you take meds or you use other kind of therapies as well, all that stuff. That's category 2. And the third strategy is using technology to leapfrog the problem, to jump over the problem entirely. And what that, for me, looks like is if someone really struggles to read, you can brute force it and read for 10 times as long. You can try and teach them to read in an alternative way, or you can use an audiobook. And so the question then is, well, what's your challenge? What's the goal you're trying to achieve? And for a lot of kids, I think they don't need to be literate. They need to be literary. They need to be well-read and understand the meaning of ideas and understand what it is to communicate. And you can do that with audiobooks really easily. Most of the reading I do now, I call it reading. It's still actually listening, right? I listen to, and it's great because I can do the dishes and listen to an academic paper. I can go for a walk and, listen to a book. And you can't do that kind of stuff without technology helping us do it. And so that's category 3, leapfrogging. And that's what my work is really all about, is using technology to jump ahead, to jump beyond, and to take us not to parity, not to equal, but actually above. So if you're neurodiverse, you can take your weakness and not make it equal, but make it a strength. And that's what my whole life now is sort of becoming about. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
What app do you use to read out academic papers while you're doing household chores? I think Joey does something similar.
Really good question. I constantly, because I test apps all the time, I'm testing different tools, it cycles through. There's a few, the one I'm loath to recommend because it's called Speechify. It's a very common one. And I find it frustrating because there's a yearly fee and it's quite high. And I think that's not fair. I think and so then also there's the classic thing, which for people that maybe forget stuff, is giving you a 4-day trial and then charging you for a year does get on my nerves. It does. That's annoying.
Yeah, classic ADHD tax there.
Yeah, I'm just like, that's brutal. And you can't go after those people because we're the people that really need it. And that's not cool. But I use Speechify. I use an app on iOS and Mac called Voice Dream, which is wonderful. It's made, as far as I know, by one guy called Winston, but he's awesome. So if you email him, he'll get back to you. And I use that all the time because it will let you import from Google Drive or any kind of cloud service or iCloud or something, and it will just let you read straight away. And for people that really like to focus on a single word at a time, it will read the audio to you and it will highlight one word at a time in a line. And so you can really remain hyper-focused if you want on reading papers. And then I can go up to 3 or 4 times speed. So I'm reading something like 800 words a minute if I really need to, or if it's a really boring paper or something, I can go through really fast. So that's awesome. And that's the leapfrogging, right? Like we were talking about, is, I'm not matching normal speed like everyone else. I'm reading 3 times as fast. Like, that's crazy, right? It's super, super cool, but really surprising that technology can let us do that now.
And I imagine that the technology is like feeding the paper into ChatGPT and then asking it to summarize it for you and then asking it questions. That's another example of where it could help.
Absolutely. And the idea that you can mix and match with that, so you can listen to a fragment, get GPT to summarize the next fragment. And I think that's where we're heading, is the idea that you can speak your notes, or you can even, this is the sort of idea I've been hoping will exist, and I think will come online in the next few months. And that is that you could just find a paper you're interested in and have a conversation with it. And the AI would be interpreting the paper. It would be creating an avatar that has the knowledge of that paper. And you'd be able to have like a 2-way dialogue, right? And how cool would it be? You could just have a conversation with the whole works of Dickens, or you could have a conversation with any academic paper, or you could have a conversation with not James Clear, but the book Atomic Habits. You could have a conversation with that fictional person. Like, that would be such a new way to engage with this kind of information. And like, I thought that was sci-fi. I thought that was, when I was a kid, I kind of dreamed that might happen. And it's like all the blocks are there, right? It's just whether or not they come together in the right order. And that's only months away. So it's cool. It's really cool.
Absolutely. I've seen something like that for API documentation. So I'm sure
really?
It'll be long before it'll be ready for books as well. It's just probably an issue of context that you can't fit a whole Charles Dickens novel into ChatGPT, that maybe 100%. That new Facebook model where it's got a 1 million line context.
Totally.
Speaking of Dickens, what do you enjoy doing in your off time? Are you a fan of classical literature?
Do you know, it's funny that I love reading. I like I was saying earlier, I really struggled to read when I was younger. And there was a 2-week period where suddenly I could read. So I went from not being able to read at all to suddenly being able to read. It was really the startling thing that happened to me when I was about 8, 9, 10, something like that. I was still quite old, but it suddenly happened. And it's just a developmental thing, right? Just suddenly clicked. And after that, I read a lot. And now I still like reading physical text, but mostly I listen to audiobooks. And I listen across the gamut. I like the novelty of, I'll read, Sherlock Holmes, which is really good. It's read by Stephen Fry to get the audiobook. I reckon it's the best value deal on Audible because it's 1 credit's worth and it's like 48 hours of audio or something. It's insane. But so there's those sorts of stuff. And then I read everything in between. Lots of, philosophers and thinkers and so all across. And then to relax, I read and I watch and I listen to music. And I used to do a lot of public speaking and debating when I was younger, when I was at high school and stuff. I found that really helped me advocate for myself, is what lots of people talk about sometimes in the neurodiversity space, which is that I can articulate some of the feelings that I'm having and make the case for why I should get support. And I feel really lucky that I can do that. And that's because I had this hobby of debating, public speaking when I was younger. And I remember really vividly my mum, I came back from a debating competition or something, and my mum was asking me to, I don't know, clean up or go to have a shower. I don't know what it was. And I started saying, well, there are 3 reasons, Mum, why I think I shouldn't do that. And she looked at me and went, I've made an error taking you to those classes, Al, a big error. And I remember thinking, yeah, like, this is great. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So you can't just, be rude and not very nice about it. But the idea that you can think about thoughts and work out how to frame them and articulate them so that they have the impact that is in your mind, that's a really useful skill to think about, I think. I spend lots of my time trying to find new ideas and new things. And, my background's in design, so I often do little design projects to relax, or I do woodworking or leatherworking or, some 3D printed thing or whatever it is. So it's always cycling and changing.
Nice. I was going to ask about the cupboard behind you or the little drawers.
Yeah. So all these drawers. If you're listening to the audio, I've got this big case behind me, and it looks a bit like an apothecary cabinet. It's got loads of drawers. This is one of my strategies to organize my life. Each of these is a kind of project or a kind of sort of component of my life. There's like an electronics thing with my solderer, and there's a leatherworking one, and there's like little prototypes for projects that I've never gotten done. My favorite thing about it, though, is that I cut the dips by hand for all these things, the sort of the finger holds. And there's one here that I forgot to do. So it's just a bit of paper I've just stuck on, so I could, make it work. And that's the kind of hack you need, right? That's the kind of hack you need. Is if you forget to do a little cut, that's all right. Just, color it in. Most people won't notice. It's all fine.
Love it.
Yeah.
So, Alisdair, can you tell us a little bit more about your morning routine and how that's evolved over time?
Sure. Sometimes I don't realize how important my morning routine is until it goes away, or until for some reason I haven't been adhering to it. Do you guys feel this way? And suddenly you're like, wait a minute, this thing is really useful. It's really important. Or I'll come to the end of a day and I'll think, this was a really useful day. What was it that made it so successful and so fun and so exciting? And it was because I set things up really effectively in the morning, or, as is often the case, the night before, I was doing the planning for how I'd sequence my morning. And that was what helped me kickstart into the day. But I get up, I wake up in bed. I try my best not to have any kind of technology that interfaces with the outside world in the bedroom. I don't always achieve that, but it's really useful to try. And just experiment with it even a day a week is kind of interesting. Often, by the way, I think strategies don't need to be strategies you do all the time. They can just be one experiment once, and that can sit in the back of your mind and give you some really helpful new thoughts for what strategies you want to adopt. But in my morning, I get up and I often run out to work. I'll have some meeting in the morning that I need to get to. But more recently, what I've been doing, and it surprised me because I wouldn't have thought it would be as useful as it has been, is I get up quite early, about sort of 6, 7, 8 o'clock, and I will go to a yoga studio and I'll do a little yoga session. And it's awesome. It's so much fun. It's really relaxing. And for me, my partner, she does yoga every evening, and she has for 2 years. Every night she can do it. She can sit down, and it's a remarkable thing. That's not me. I tried it. I try and join in with her, and it's not happening. So instead, I go to a place, and it's not like a gym. It's not sweaty and unpleasant. It's calm. It's tranquil. There are other people there that are focused and that are doing their thing. And that collective thing, I'm kind of using them as a kind of body doubling exercise, right? I'm going there, and they're all doing the yoga, and I'll do the yoga too. Actually, I don't duck out after 15 minutes. I stay there for an hour because everyone else is, and it's kind of fun. And then you feel relaxed, and you have to do 5 minutes of mindfulness before everyone starts because no one's doing anything. So you just have to sit in your own head for a bit. Then you do some movements, which is good. And then you stop and you rest for a few more minutes, and there's some nice sound in the background, and you go, that's really good. So that's my most recent thing, is a few days a week I've been going and doing that. And for anyone that's thinking about trying it but hasn't tried it yet, give it a go and try lots of different yoga studios. Find one that sort of fits your vibe. There are some that I felt like I didn't want to intrude. I felt like, oh, this is a group of people. This is not my space. I don't want to, be that person coming in and not being sort of sensitive to that. So I went to a few, found one where everyone was really warm and friendly, and I went there. And there's an app called ClassPass, and that lets you just buy one class at a time rather than like a weekly subscription. So if you want to try, you can sign up and basically go to 3 or 4 places for free before they actually make you pay for a class, and it ends up being about $10 a class or something after that. So it's pretty good. So that's what I do. There you go. That's my morning routine.
Awesome. That would be amazing, doing an hour in the morning and mixing in some mindfulness as well. And I agree about going to a particular location really helps. It's probably
totally
the body doubling aspect of it too. Do you carry that body doubling approach forward into your workday as well?
I really try to. And I don't know if people can relate to this, but like when you're at school or when you're at a job where you have to sit and write and work, it's difficult to try and connect to people and use body doubling really successfully. I'm very lucky. I've got colleagues, and I book meetings, and I'll give myself like a 3-hour gap between meetings, which sounds really inefficient, right? That like, why would you go in and then wait 3 hours for another meeting? But that 3 hours is golden, right? That 3 hours is awesome. So I know what I've got to do. I know there's a clear endpoint. And so yes, there are people in the office, and that's nice. So I do body double in that way, but also just having the fact that I know there's a finite period of time between 2 locked events. But it's time I can use for myself. It's not time I've committed to anyone else. Those sorts of things I do at work a lot, and they're really, really useful for me. Yeah.
Nice. And during those 3 hours, any other productivity hacks that you use to stay focused?
Oh, great question. Yeah, is the answer. There's loads of different tools that I use. And it really depends on the kind of work you're doing. And I think we were talking about this earlier, that there's no one strategy that is a universal strategy that always works for me. And there's no one app or tool or system that I've locked in and I'll never stop. I'll never be willing to stop using. And the danger is that you want the game of productivity to overcome the act of productivity. And I think that's a big risk. So you have to make sure if you're going to jump to a new app or you're going to experiment with something, that it's worth the jump. That if you're switching, like I use Notion as my note-taking app, but for years I've been thinking, what if I used Obsidian? Maybe that would be better, right? And maybe it would be, right? Different note-taking app lets you visualize and connect notes together in this kind of second brain way where you're digitizing all your thoughts and the connections between those thoughts, so you can offload them and think about them in a new way. And that goes to the kind of leapfrogging as well, which is that like my memory is pretty good. It's okay. It's not perfect. I forget stuff sometimes. Everyone does, particularly people that are neurodiverse. There are some types of things we forget really easily, right? But if I use a digital mind to remember things for me, I don't make my memory as good as the best person with the best memory in the world. I make my memory infallible. It can't be forgotten. It's locked in. Like it's like superhuman levels of memory, right? And so I use Notion, but I sometimes jump over. I use a bunch of speech-to-text tools and text-to-speech tools. So all my meetings, I think the key one, the best one I'd really recommend to anyone is use some kind of audio note taker. I use one called Otter that auto joins all my Zoom meetings. Sometimes I get in trouble for that. If there's like something important, like staff meeting, I have to like manually turn it on. But yeah, I have my Zoom meetings, all my meetings in person. If it's some important work thing, I will say, hey, do you mind if I take notes using right now? And I'll just use my audio note taker. And I've never had anyone have a problem with that. The only response I've ever gotten, well, there's 2 responses. One is, sure, no worries. Or, oh, that's awesome. How does it work? The 2 responses, right? So Otter is awesome because it records, it creates a transcription of that recording. If there's some bit of the transcription you don't like, you can click it and just listen back to the audio if you need. And it will also give you an automated summary of that meeting too. And so I've got a little search engine and I can search every meeting I've ever had with my PhD supervisor. And it doesn't matter which meeting it was, the system remembers it all. And so when I'm there, I'm really present, I'm really focused. All I'm focusing on is paying attention to what's being said and what I might say next and why that might be interesting. I don't need to remember about what it actually was said 5 minutes ago. That's locked away in the vault. That's already remembered for me. So the productivity hack is work out the things that are pulling you out of your work and try and take them down one by one. And if it's that you're listening to music to try and focus, but actually you just end up like bopping to Taylor Swift's new re-release or something, then switch to stuff without lyrics, or I use Endel as my procedurally generated audio system, and that takes my heart rate from my Apple Watch and uses that to track the music so that it stays in pace with my heart rate and it keeps me focused. But there are loads of different tools. So experiment. There's Brain FM. There's just lo-fi on the Lo-Fi Girl or whatever on YouTube. There's loads of stuff. So pick whichever one's best for you. They all have slightly different flavors. But so I listen to music. I use note-taking apps so I don't forget stuff, and I use audio note takers. And they're and I use lots of timers as well. And those things together generally helps me. Yeah.
I'd like to dig into two of the things you said there that I didn't fully understand. One was with the in-person audio note-taking. Do you use an app on your phone to do that, or is that a literal audio note-taking physical device?
Super interesting. Yes, I use my phone mostly, or my laptop or my iPad or whatever it might be. And you can set up a shortcut on your phone. So rather than opening the app and then starting recording, it's just one button, which is just the start record button. So that's what I do. And you can do that on iOS or Android, whichever platform you're on, it will work. But I've recently seen that there's a new sort of class of recording device, which is specifically for AI note-taking. And it's a physical recording device that you can have. And there's one on Kickstarter at the moment. I forget what it's called. And you clip it to the back of your phone, and it uses the vibrations of the phone to pick up the other person's speech as well. And so that's kind of interesting. If you want it to be everywhere and you want it to be separate to your phone, you could just bring the little box with you. But I usually just use my phone.
It's a great idea. I hadn't really thought about doing it in an in-person meeting, and that makes a lot of sense. And doing it in a way that is low friction, because that's, I guess, the concern for me, that where's my actual voice note app and how do I start it? But using the shortcut would make it way easier.
Absolutely.
The other one was, how do you spell, was it Endel? The heart rate based?
Yeah, I think it's Endel. Let's get it up, shall we?
I think I've heard of that. Is it sometimes used with workouts as well, that it'll change the cadence of the music depending on your heart rate?
I think that's right. E-N-D-E-L. Endel. They're really interesting because you can ask them to help you focus or help you sleep or help you study or help you read. And they've tuned the AI generator so that the different options you select are going to try and push you towards those activities, which is kind of cool. But again, some people find it super useful and other people find it annoying and slightly disorienting. So, give it a go, see if it suits you, and then go from there. That's what I'd say. Yeah, it's really cool though. I like it.
Absolutely. One other thing that often helps people with their productivity is taking frequent breaks. So we're going to take a short break. Will be cool. Our next question after that.
Hello there, this is Joey. I'm excited to tell you about a project I run where I help imaginative people just like you breathe life into their creative dreams, like writing that book or performing that stand-up comedy set. I know the first step can be daunting. I've been there many times and have helped many people on a similar journey. If you've wondered how to bring those ideas swimming around in your head to life, get in touch. We'll shrink the intimidating dragon of a goal into a cute little lizard of an achievable daily habit that you can do every day to get started and stay moving. Click on the link in the show description to get in touch. And we're back. So, Alisdair, what's one habit you'd like to remove from your life? Either a bad habit or one that takes up too much time?
I love this question. I think it's such an interesting one. I've been thinking about it throughout the whole interview, thinking, how do I get to this? So I noticed something a few months ago now, and that was that I was following the news and the politics and the kind of daily sort of debates in 3 countries: in the UK, which is where I grew up, in the US, which is a big important country, and it's where my partner's from, and in Australia as well, which is where we are. And I thought to myself, but none of this actually matters. I can't actually do anything about it. It's important. The world, changes and things happen. And it's important to know what they're going on. But I thought to myself, why am I listening to the news? And I realized it was maybe just a form of like entertainment. Like, I was like, oh, well, I don't watch The Voice, or I don't watch like Real Housewives or something, but I listen to the news and that's great. But it's just a kind of slightly fancier form of entertainment sometimes. And so you have to be really careful. And I realized I had to be really careful with picking, like, is this because I really think it's important to know? Or is this because it's fun to learn, like it's fun to be informed, but it's not important to be informed? Particularly the test I use now is like, will this be important a month or a year from now? And if not, sometimes I go, maybe not. And that's, I think, so that's the habit I'd really like to get rid of, is, consuming so much news. And, I do try and have a varied source of news, and often try and access long form news and stuff. But actually, news is kind of often quite negative. It's quite depressing. It frames problems and it doesn't often offer solutions. And there are other news sites like Future Crunch, I think, is like, only good news. It's like, the idea there is that there's so much news and not enough of it is good news. And so Future Crunch is just exclusively good news. It's the sort of antidote to depressing news. But all of that, maybe I'd have a bit less of that. So maybe I'd have a little bit less news in my life. That would be my big thing to cut, I reckon.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I've often been a slave to the headlines. There's a great book by Alisdair Gurling, The News, a User's Manual, and he talks about how it's better to have an approach which is more slow news, of reading potentially periodicals that are once per week instead of once per day or once per hour, because there's how much can we actually consume, and like you said, not much we can control about it. And one of the things that it does for me is it makes it very hard for me to sleep if I've read bad news. So how about you?
Totally.
How do you switch off in the evening?
Also, I think an important thing, because I think although people think the morning is the beginning of the day and the evening is the end of the day, they happen really close to one another. There's just some sleeping in between, which we're not really aware of. So they're really one, in one way, it's useful to think about them, I think, in just one big block, right? So if you don't have your shower in the morning, you have a shower in, only, one block of time before that last evening. But how do I unwind? I try and mix it up, is the short answer. I do. There's one habit I'm really quite consistent with, and that's that I go for a walk most evenings. After dinner, my partner and I will go for a walk for half an hour or something around. And, you really get a sense of where you live and, where you are in space. And I think that's useful when you're working during the rest of your day. It's just knowing, roughly where you are in space. I think that can ground you a bit. But also that movement, you can get to unpack some ideas of what your day meant and what you're going to do in the next day. And when I come home, I feel like that's the hard line, that before I went on my walk and we had dinner, maybe external things could come in. That's possible. Maybe there's an email, maybe I get a phone call, maybe we go out, something like that. But after that walk, it's only looking inwards. It's only winding down. It's only having the shower to close out, or, 10 minutes of meditation, or listen to a book, or read a book, or watch some show. But it's always down, not up, and not out, kind of critically, always in. So that's how I wind down. That's maybe the line in my sand.
Love it. And it's probably good for digestion as well, going for a walk after dinner.
Totally. Apparently it's really good for the Mediterranean diet. Is you have all your olive oil and your veggies, and then you go for a walk, and apparently that's really good from a sort of overall health standpoint too.
Well, you just mentioned the Mediterranean diet. Are there any other resources like books, philosophies, apps, academic theories, sensory toys that you find useful in productivity and habit formation?
Absolutely. There are so many different things. We could do another 3 hours on sort of all the stuff that might be useful, and I'd like to hear what you guys think as well. Yeah, that'd be awesome. But for me, I think there's kind of two ideas that I think maybe are ideas that not everyone in this space thinks about, and I think are kind of useful. So they're the two ideas I'll try and share with you guys. And there are lots of people that write about it and think about it. And the first one is that throughout civilization, we've created labels and definitions and boundaries to things. That you are, you're happy or sad, and you're successful or unsuccessful, or you're clever or stupid, right? And I think that actually is a human construction. It's not the way nature is, and it's not the way human minds have evolved. And with neurodiversity, it's not true that there is a clearly bounded disorder of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Most people who have ADHD, for instance, don't actually have that much hyperactivity. It doesn't, you can't track their symptoms. So the key thing there is to think about and expand the way you think about yourself beyond just any one label. Some people find the label really useful and edifying, particularly in later life if they're getting a term that they can associate all the challenges and difficulties they've had. But I would say really great benefits come from thinking that any kind of thing that makes you happy is an ADHD strategy. And I think anything that makes you sad is an outcome of you as a person, as an Al, or as a Jeremy, or as whoever it might be. That's just you to some degree. And so I think breaking it down that way lets you come up with alternative solutions to the difficulties that you have. It lets you solve one thing with another. So if you have a focus problem, like maybe, I don't know, joining a football club, that's a really useful thing because you're suddenly exhausted and you've relaxed and you've done something physical, and that's been really great. But that was just you doing a fun thing that you liked. It just happened to have a side effect of being useful. And actually, if you live your life looking for positive, helpful, exciting things to do, you'll find that your mind will push you towards things that as a whole help you and the strategies that are effective. And so I would say that's just one thing. It's locking down in terms of ADHD or in terms of dyslexia or any kind of neurodiversity. I think sometimes if you're finding that focusing too much on that isn't giving you the benefits you expect, try zooming out and seeing if that helps you. So that's one sort of philosophy or idea that I think not everyone talks about enough. I think that's really useful.
Does that also relate to in terms of people taking on the label and it becoming a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that, oh, I'm going to be late because I have ADHD, rather than also looking at that it's not destiny, that there are things that I can do to change it and it may be harder?
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point. There's this idea of an internal and external locus of control. And that just really means, do you think that you're in control of what happens to you, or do you think the world is conspiring to make things happen to you? And there's loads of evidence and loads of research that says that if you believe you have an internal locus of control, you're more able to achieve things in your life, you're more happy, and the other people around you are more happy too. So I think that's a really important point. And that comes to using ADHD as an external thing, an externalizing thing that lets you justify in terms of outside of yourself. I don't think can be I think could be really unhelpful. Explaining elements of your personality that you can't maybe help, that's sometimes really useful. But the idea that because you can't help it, it's not you and something that you're not doing, that I think is the jump that might go a bit too far. So I think be wary of it. And sometimes I think we all fall prey to that, which is, it's not my fault the bus is late. And it's true, it's not your fault the bus is late, but the bus was late and you went on it, and such is life, right? And you can still be pretty optimistic and happy about it, while also saying, oh, I'm really sorry, that was me. What a shame. And people are usually, when you're sincere and friendly, they're pretty open to errors, particularly when you take responsibility for them. So I totally agree with that idea. I think it's a really important addition. And in fact, I did at Melbourne Design Week, I did a workshop. It was called A Sense of Purpose with a couple of colleagues of mine. And it's this workshop we developed. And the workshop was trying to work out, particularly in creative industries, but really across all industries, what it is that gives you purpose and gives you forward motivation to do things. And the research is really interesting. I'll just share one little fragment with you guys, which is that we do this exercise that lets you pick different types of motivations and sort of sort out which ones are the ones that are really important for you. And it's surprising because lots of people have really different motivations, but you can cluster them really into a few categories in terms of things that are to do with the sense of purpose that you have in the world, really magnifying a sense of expertise that you have, a sense of curiosity, and a sense of community or connection with people, right? And then finally, there's this sense of obligation towards things that are sort of structural barriers. And the research shows that if you have an even mix of these things, not just like, I just want to be seen as the expert, I just want to feel like I'm working for my people. If you have a mixture of these areas, that's what can be the most successful. And the only exception for that is obligations, things that are an external locus of control. I have to do this thing because work says I have to do it. I have to do this thing because I'll be fired, or I need to make money, or my family says I need to do it. That thinking actually pollutes all of the other motivations. And it means you get a massive drop in productivity and efficacy. So the research is really clear, which is a diverse mix of motivations, but ones that you are choosing for your own reasons, for you wanting to do it. And so, yeah, that's what my research says, and that's what I try and take into my life as well. Sometimes not successfully, but I do try.
It's interesting with the difference between community versus obligation. Is it a difference between, if it's obligation, it feels like, oh, I have to help my parents, versus I love my parents and I want to help them?
Totally. And when I've been working with people, it's been really interesting that a lot of people, they say, oh, I've got this obligation to my family or to work, like they gave me a job and I feel like I need to keep working there. But actually, underneath that is actually an intrinsic motivation, which is I love my parents and I want to help them. You're totally right. And so just acknowledging that you might describe it like, oh, I have to help my mum today because she asked me to. And actually, although I love my mum, she's great, but let's say you felt that way. Actually, underneath that, it might be, yes, you feel obliged in this moment, but you actually have a different sense, a sense of purpose towards being the kind of person that helps people when they ask. And that's an internal thing about the person you want to be. And so that's okay. But you have to go down the line to see what it really is that motivates you. And people, when they do some exercises that I've been working on with my colleagues, we've been working on how to make people do that digging, because it's quite difficult sometimes. And doing it with people is useful too, which is why we often use workshops as our sort of ways in. Because in groups you can compare and go, oh, you do it differently, why? And that's fun too. But yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. I feel like we definitely should do another episode. I've got a meeting in a couple of minutes, so I'm going to have to cut this one short. Just
totally.
Final two questions. Where can people connect with you? Is your website the best place?
Yeah, at the moment, alisdairgurling.com is where you can send me an email. There's a little form on there. It's a really simple site, but that's where it is. You can also probably contact me through my university page, which is if you go on the Emerging Tech Lab, you can find me as one of the PhD candidates there. But again, I've got lots of projects that will always be emerging. So if you go onto one of those two places, hopefully you'll find a link to whatever that's happening next.
Wonderful, Alisdair. Do you have any final words or asks for our audience?
Ooh, yeah, I do. And that is just, it's very easy when you're struggling in the world, when you're a neurodiverse person, to try and be really quick to find absolutes. This strategy works perfectly well. This person is really engaged and will help me, or it really isn't engaged and doesn't get it. And sometimes it's true. But I often find that trying to sit in the nuance of why something's more complex, why there's a deeper story, and why our own minds are more complex and more nuanced than we often realize, that unlocks a whole world of opportunities. But that's just for me, and maybe that doesn't work for everyone. And that's part of the fun of it, right? And so all I'd say is we've got all our own strategies, and sitting and comparing them is probably the best chance we have of moving forward together. And I think that works really, really well. So hopefully everyone who listens to the podcast can reach out and we can talk about what strategies we're going to use together.
Wonderful. And we'll wrap the show with that.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.